Species. Unite.
Anybody with half a heart could understand that this is a very bad deal for these feeling beings, that being waken up every day at the same place where these horrible things happened. No. It's not right.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. We'd like to thank Lush for sponsoring today's episode. Lush advocates for people, animals, and the planet. Through their ethically sourced ingredients and their grants program, they give back locally and around the world. It's been almost a decade since the National Institutes of Health ended the use of chimpanzees for biomedical research. But today, we still have scores of chimpanzees sitting in labs. They're not being tested on, but they're still waiting to be moved into sanctuary. This is happening even though there's a law in place that established a federal sanctuary system to provide lifetime care for chimpanzees retired from medical research. 26 of these former research chimpanzees live in the Alamogordo Primate Facility on Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. So I asked Jean Grant, the Chief Program and Policy Officer for Animal Protection, New Mexico, to come on the show and talk about why, all these years later, these chimps have still not been moved to a sanctuary and how that changes. Hi, Jean.
Hi there, Elizabeth.
It's really good to have you on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm really honored. Thank you. Would love to talk about this subject with your audience. Trust me.
I'm so glad you're here to talk about it. We're talking about chimpanzees in labs in the United States, and we're going to get into it. But I think one thing we can start with, because this just happened, in the New York Times a couple weeks ago, there was an article called "Aging and Ailing Lab Chimps Are Still at the Center of a Fight for Sanctuary." And then you sent me an article from 2010. And it's basically the same article.
Isn't that harrowing?
14 years later.
2010. It's amazing. And I think you've really hit on what the real issue is here for a lot of people, that this situation's gone on for so long. And it's so illogical. It's so ill in so many different ways, but mainly unfair to these former research chimps who by law should be at Chimp Haven at this point. So, when you talk about 14-year leaps where nothing is happening, this is what's frustrating people. This is why folks in Congress are hearing from people now from that New York Times story that could not have been, better timed. But as you know, in that Times story, they really touched on the big problem here. I'll just kind of give you a 30,000-foot kind of take on the article. And that is the NIH's, the National Institutes of Health. They're now claiming that these chimps are too moribund to move. And I'm going to use moribund in finger quotes here because honestly, they've been saying that for 3 years. And as you know, moribund, as is usually accepted in the medical profession and everybody else, means you're on the brink of death. Well, they're not on the brink of death. There's been lots and lots of chimps that have been transported to Chimp Haven that have been in the same health situation these APF chimps are now, who have been successfully moved. So that article really touched on it. And I tell you, reading the comments underneath the article was really very enlightening for me. Folks get it.
Yeah.
They get it. This is the law.
People are angry. They're really angry.
Yeah.
Go back for a second and tell us what Chimp Haven is.
Yes, absolutely. Chimp Haven is a 200-acre primate facility that was built and designed to house former research chimpanzees, federal government-owned research chimpanzees. And there is a difference about, where these chimps come from, roadside attractions, all the crazy stuff that happens in chimp world. But for our purposes, the Alamogordo Primate Facility is located in Alamogordo, New Mexico. It's in the southern part of the state. It is actually on the Air Force Base of Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. So that's a double problem. You got these chimps that were brought there in the 1950s to support the Mercury space program. That's how it all started. And then as the years went by, they got into breeding their own instead of capture. And then suddenly APF had all these chimps on their hands and they were sold to Colston. And then that mess started. We don't have to go that far back. But for the purposes of our conversation right now, that's the situation. These chimps are literally stuck in this awful federal limbo where the NIH, who also runs Chimp Haven, it's a weird sort of a strange partnership. They supply some of the money to Chimp Haven, but not all of it. And we'll talk about that too. So the 26 chimps that are at APF, the Alamogordo Primate Facility, they could be transferred to Chimp Haven. Raina Smith, the CEO of Chimp Haven, was just on NPR's Here and Now this week, as a matter of fact, saying that, with some federal investment in some buildings, they could take those 26 chimps out of APF. Now we got to figure out why the NIH is not allowing this to happen. So that's where we are now. It's a very strange circumstance.
Let's start with laying out the timeline,
Sure.
just so people get the bigger picture. So when did it become illegal to test on chimpanzees? And when did it get decided, hey, we're not testing on them anymore and we're going to start releasing them to sanctuaries? When was that?
That's a great question because actually a lot of things pinwheel off that decision. That was in 2015. Then NIH Director Dr. Francis Collins announced in 2015 that research on chimpanzees would be ending. Regrettably, when we thought at that point, freedom was inevitable for these chimps. Like that was the step, like, woohoo! Where the NIH director himself said this is not happening anymore. So why would you want to keep these chimps there? Well, in 2019, that's when the big turnaround was. That's when the NIH announced they wouldn't be transferring these chimps because of their frail health and whatever excuses they want to use outside of the Chimp Act. And that's where we are today, 2024 from 2019. That's where this fight has been stuck, unfortunately.
This has been going on 5 years. For the 26 chimps that are at Alamogordo, were they all used in research?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, every single one. This brings us back to this moribund issue in their health. Now, a lot of them have comorbidities or, things that happened during their era where they did have to go through all these procedures. Some of them, it's more of an emotional thing. And, being in a family unit or social unit, as they say, at Chimp Haven. But Chimp Haven knows how to deal with that too. And they've taken a lot of chimps who have had isolation problems. And we're that's a concern about the APF chimps as they're not in, groups that make them thrive. They have to spend lots of times in isolation and cages. They don't deserve it. They deserve to be in family groups, social groups, all the things that happen with that Chimp Haven is so brilliant at. They can take in chimps that have suffered literally anything. So for the NIH to come out with this idea or this notion that, hey, all along we've been sticking with this moribund thing and we've been assuming that everybody else was too, is so far beyond the pale. It really hurts your heart at a certain level. And this is why the fight has really started to engage, Elizabeth, in a way that really hasn't in the past few years. Folks have really had it. The Chimp Act was signed in 2000 by President Clinton. That's the law. I mean, here we are 24 years later. It's completely absurd, but that's how federal agencies work. So it's awfully tough.
What did the Chimp Act say?
The Chimp Act was very clear that chimps that were formerly used as research chimps would have to be moved to federal sanctuary. And the Chimp Act was the start of the establishment of Chimp Haven. That's where it started. Everything went from there. Now, there were amendments in 2013 that had to do with costs and who pays for what. And regrettably, we've got a situation that the NIH only has to pay for 75% of the costs at Chimp Haven for infrastructure. The rest has to be raised by Chimp Haven, by the board, by the executive staff, and they have to go out and hat in hand and ask the rest of the country and taxpayers who are already paying for this to pay more. You see that another level of absurdity here? Yes. It just gets really kooky when you start to get into the details here. Why is Chimp Haven having to pay for these things? Why they have at 20? By the way, I should say, 25% of their needs is a lot of money. These are aging facilities. There are needs right now in buildings, There's a lack of air conditioning for the staff in the buildings where they work at Chimp Haven. We're talking about northern Louisiana. It gets warm, it gets humid, it gets, all the things we know about Louisiana. And the chimps don't have AC. I mean, it really is a difficulty. So our feeling at Animal Protection New Mexico is things have come to a head. If there really isn't a time to really sit down and talk about this with all people concerned, and that includes the new NIH director, Dr. Monica Bertagnolli, who is new to the job as of just last fall, this is the moment. We have an opportunity for good people to rise up here and do something for these chimps who deserve sanctuary. They deserve it. They have paid their debt to our country. They're living at the same facility where they were tortured, literally. It's time for it to end.
And will you just explain the difference between what their life is at APF, at Alamogordo, versus what the chimps that get retired to Chimp Haven's life looks like?
200 acres. There are trees to swing in. There are games to play. There's a huge setup that they have for the chimps that allow them to go up and down and vertical and horizontal and really swing around. You don't have that at the Alamogordo Primate Facility on an Air Force base. You don't have anything close to that. What you have are legacy cages and legacy facilities that are just cement bunkers that were built way, way, way back where no one even gave so much as a second thought about their emotional well-being. And that's why there's a lot of issues that come with isolation. There's a lot of issues that come with depression. Years ago, there were primatologists that were figuring out that chimps were being euthanized at APF just for simply being depressed and not eating. And when you're that old, and if you're not eating, you know what happens to the human body. It'll show up very quickly in your physiology. And that's what was happening to these chimps. And these veterinarians were just saying, well, looks like they're too depressed to care anymore. We might as well just euthanize them. And this is the kind of life that's been happening on a working Air Force base, I should mention. I mean, there's a lot of jets scrambling out of Hollow. It's a very busy Air Force base. So no, it is not optimal. It is not even comparable. It is not even reasonably comparable. And one more point on this, Elizabeth, if I could, because there's been a lot of pressure to do this instead. A lot of congressional members in the past have said, let's just put money into the primate facility at Alamogordo, make it better, make it more whatever for chimps. And that idea keeps going down in flames because all the experts come into a testimony in Congress and say, folks, that's not going to work. Building more cages and more bunkers in a place that is brutally hot, by the way, as well. Southern New Mexico, it was 98 in Albuquerque yesterday, and Albuquerque is in the middle of the state at 5,000 feet above sea level. It's not optimal. They've got to get to Chimp Haven. That's where they should be. That's where their best life can be. They deserve to live out their years. And by the way, another point here, maybe we'll get into this later. These chimps are slated to live for a while. They're going to be with us for a while. They live a good long time. So in the 2050s and beyond is when we can expect to see these current chimps live if they got transferred to Chimp Haven.
Wow.
It's very sobering.
How old are these chimps?
Anywhere between 25 and 35, maybe just a little bit older for some of them.
Okay.
They can live well into their 50s and some into their 60s. It's another little angle, that interesting physiology of our close, relationship with these animals that, they can be elderly and live a quality life just like a human being. Elderly is not a death sentence for a chimpanzee. It just means a little bit of a different life, just like with an elder human, but it doesn't mean they have to be euthanized just because they're getting to a certain level of age. So, we've got a little bit of a disconnection here with the federal government.
What this really comes down to, though, is money.
I'm so glad you brought this up. That's the thunk you just heard in the background is the bottom line here landing. That is money. It's the United States. This is how we work. Charles River Labs, based out of Massachusetts, is the contract holder at APF for these chimps. They are the so-called caretakers of these chimps, and they get paid by the federal government to do it. And an interesting anecdote here on costs that really is one of the real rubs here is it costs per chimp per day, and this is from the NIH's own estimates for 2023. Right now, it costs $129 per chimp per day at the APF facility at the Air Force Base in New Mexico. That compares to $52 per chimp per day at Chimp Haven. It's a massive difference. And when you factor in the quality of life betterment for the $52 per day versus $129 per day, it's a no-brainer to anybody that looks at this except the federal government.
But why is the government, because they're paying Charles River this $129 per day per chimp. Wouldn't they want to pay a lot less? Or is it just so stuck in a system?
You hit it. It's stuck in a system. It's a contract deal. A lot of government folks, meaning congressional people, do not want to get in the middle of a private contract situation. But the difference here is it's a private contract with the federal government. It's a contract with us, with you and I and every federal taxpayer. And the fact that we don't have a say in this contract, we don't have a say in this nutty system where $129 per chimp per day versus $52 for a better life isn't an automatic situation that turns the key. And again, for a lot of folks, this is anger inducing. For a lot of our congressional members here in New Mexico, this is the bit that drives them crazy.
Yeah.
Because they just don't like this at all. I mean, a little bit extra is one thing. 129 versus 52 is so massive a difference. We're talking over the course of a lifetime of a chimp, a massive difference in cost to the taxpayer. So,
and what at the Air Force facility at Alamogordo are they spending $129 a day on a chimp for?
That is an excellent question. Why? Because nobody can get into the facility to look. This is the problem, Elizabeth. It's an Air Force base. You can't just walk up and knock on the door and say, I'd like to look at the APF chimps and see if they're doing okay. You have to get permission from the NIH to step onto either APF or Chimp Haven. And that includes congressional members. A lot of folks don't know about the power of NIH here. You have to literally apply to the National Institutes of Health to go to either facility, and they can tell you no, even if you're a member of Congress, and it has happened. Now, former Governor Bill Richardson, who passed away last year here in New Mexico, he was the last local politician to gain entry at APF, and that was back in, I want to say 2010, somewhere back then. And we had Dr. Karen Cronin, who looked at the chimps. She's a primatologist and connected with with one of the zoos here in the United States. That was way, way back as well. She's been the last primatologist outside of the hired people from Charles River Labs to look at these chimps. We're relying on veterinarians who are hired by Charles River Labs to assess these chimpanzees. This is a major problem. The NIH will not allow, for some reason, any outside veterinarians to assess these chimps on this moribund determination. And that's the problem. You've got the APF chimps being designated as such by a veterinarian who works for the company hired to take care of these chimps. What are they going to say? Of course, they're going to say they're moribund.
And it's the company that's making $129 a day per chimp, and as well as has almost every other contract in this country for animal testing.
That's right.
They've run the show across the gamut, and they've been caught doing horribly illegal things, and they still are winning, and it's insane.
That's right.
Yeah.
It makes me cringe when I hear you say the term "they're winning" because they are. Not if APM has something to do about it, not for long. But at this point, Charles River Labs has made untold millions of dollars from animals and animal testing over the life of this company and over the life of these chimps at APF. We're talking back Colston days, when those chimps were moved and sold. We had a university that was associated with them. They divested themselves of the chimps. They're the last folks standing, literally, between getting some freedom for these chimps and having them stuck where they are just so a company can make a contract for $129 a chimp per day. Now, I would say it would net down to not much less than that, Elizabeth, when you're talking about food, veterinary care, caretaking. Let's say it nets down to something like, $100 or $110 or $90 a day after you take a couple things off the top. That's still not a good deal for the American taxpayer by any stretch. Because again, it's about the quality of life for these chimps. Yeah, they could be fed anywhere. You can do that in a box. But they deserve so much more, and that's what we're fighting for here at Animal Protection New Mexico.
So they're basically in prison in the place where they were tortured and have total PTSD from.
I'm saying yes. I mean, these are feeling, sentient creatures here. They're beings. And that means there's memory, there's emotional memory, there's emotional muscle memory. And if you're going to be housed in a place that's less than 400 feet, and some of the buildings are way less than that from the same place where these unfortunate situations happen for years and years and years, of course they remember this.
Right.
Of course they feel this. I mean, it just, anybody with half a heart could understand that this is a very bad deal for these feeling beings, that being waken up every day at the same place where these horrible things happened. No. It's not right.
No, it's horrible. Now let's get into what's been happening for the past 5 years and and how that's all going down. Like what's actually happening.
You know, it's been interesting when that happened in 2019, when the NIH said they're going to reverse course and in fact just keep the chimps exactly where they are. There was a pretty big public outcry. It sort of fell off a little bit only because we had a change at the top at NIH, meaning there was an interim director, Dr. Tabak, for a lot of years until just this past fall, on October specifically, when Dr. Monica Bertagnolli was tabbed to be the new director of the NIH. Now, she comes from inside NIH world, meaning she ran NCI, the National Cancer Institute, which is the largest of the 26 agencies that are under the umbrella of the NIH. Now, what's happened is Dr. Bertagnolli, during the hearing in the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee that is chaired by Chairman Sanders, Bernie Sanders, in the Senate, of course, they're the committee that does the hearings for the new director. Now, APNM here in Animal Protection New Mexico, we submitted to Ben Ray Lujan, Senator Lujan, one of our senators here in New Mexico, a question for the record for the new NIH director. It was in writing. And once you do that, by law, whoever gets what we call a QFR, question for the record, has to respond. And so the new NIH director last fall, in fact, responded and said, I intend to follow the Chimp Act and give these chimpanzees the sanctuary they deserve. This was in writing. This was her words. And so we were, again, at Animal Protection in New Mexico, we were like, well, okay, look, so we've turned a page. And NIH, and let's reward the new director for her stance. Let's not push her. Let's just let nature take its course. Let her get in at the first of the year. But here's what's happened, Elizabeth. Over the course of many asks, we've not heard from Dr. Bertagnolli since then. And what we're calling on her to do, and this is along with our partners at HSUS, folks that you know well, we're calling for a timeline and a plan to release these chimps. If it has to be in 2s and 3s, how do we do it? If it's better to do it all at once, what's the best way to do it for Chimp Haven? What's the best level of investment? What's the timeline to do that? Again, for our congressional members, what's the best way to fund it? I mean, we're not talking about a lot of money here when it comes to the federal government. I mean, there are estimates out there, Elizabeth, that if you take the entire universe of chimpanzees that are needing sanctuary, meaning federal chimps, and there are a number of federal places right now, it's not just Alamogordo. I mentioned roadside chimps. I mentioned it's about 222, somewhere around there. And over the course of a lifetime, at a certain number that's debatable, you're looking at somewhere about $55 to $65 million. Well, in federal government, point of view, 55 to 65 million it's an insult to chump change.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really not a whole lot of money. If you're talking about Department of Defense, I mean, wherever it comes from, that's not a whole lot of money to get everything sort of sorted out and get all these chimps 200 plus to some kind of sanctuary. That's also part of the push we're looking at here. It's not just the APF chimps. There's a lot of chimpanzees out there that need to be dealt with. And so we need some help from Capitol Hill. That's what's going on right now. It's a lot of activity behind the scenes right now to try to get something moving.
It's not just the Alamogordo chimps that are in laboratories still, right? There's others still in labs? That's
right. There's labs in quotes. There's the Keeling Center in Texas. They're X-labs, so to speak. They're just like Alamogordo. We need to get all of these chimps into sanctuary. Yeah. Now, obviously, at Animal Protection New Mexico, our main focus is the 26 now at APF still living.
Right.
But we're working hand in hand with NAPSA and other groups out there to try to figure out how do we approach Congress with some kind of larger, holistic plan that finally says, all right, guys, let's sit down here and look at the entire universe and figure out an end game here. We can't keep nibbling at this because we can't keep letting natural attrition, meaning death, be the main driver on how we move these chimps around.
I mean, that's what it seems like they're doing, though. They're just waiting for them to die.
It really can be very unfortunate, to think about that. I don't think these are terrible people at NIH, certainly. I don't think they get joy out of this about chimps dying. I mean, these are folks, there are parts of NIH, there's ORIP, there are different departments there that work very closely with chimpanzees. I don't think that's their thing. Right. I think it's more, I don't think it's a mean-spirited thing. I think it's more that this has been going on for so long, and it's just so baked into the NIH culture and the Air Force Base and everything else. And then finally, because it's a contract with a firm, somebody has to step in and say, all right, guys, the contract's over 2 years from now or 3 years from now. You've made your millions. We're moving on. You don't have to be caretakers anymore. You can do other things.
Yeah.
We've got better, we've got people that can do this better than you, as a matter of fact.
And cheaper.
And cheaper, yeah. But no one's watching. That's what's happening.
Every time I talk to anyone about any kind of horrible animal testing, any kind of situation, but a lot of primates, the name that comes up every time is Charles River. And I'm so sick of their name because they're associated with so many bad things happening across this country. And somehow the government's protecting them again.
It's a very strange relationship that nobody really has a handle on. This is the same group that's trying to open that giant facility in Bainbridge, Georgia.
Yes.
With those 30,000 macaques that will be held in a bunker. I mean, macaques don't live but 10% of their life on the ground. They live almost entirely in trees. They won't get any of that. 30,000? And this is because there's this thing out there, Elizabeth, and you've covered this so-called monkey shortage that's out there right now, that these monkey suppliers this is what they're whispering to elected people endlessly right now. This is the latest thing where they're saying there's going to be a rollback in how Americans get their health, not covered, but how new things are developed to make Americans healthier if we don't have these monkeys. Well, as you know, the efficacy of monkey testing and primate testing does not match up with human need.
It fails 94% of the time. 94%.
Isn't that something? But yet, here we still ram at that door with our heads, waiting for some kind of breakthrough. And the only people doing this are the folks being paid to do this. That's all it is. It's just a money thing that's millions and billions that circles round and round and round from all these sources to do all these tests that come up with nothing.
And so when it first became a law that we're no longer going to test on chimpanzees, what was like the moral consciousness, the moment that happened that made this happen?
It was quite the moment, actually. In December 2000, when President Clinton signed the Chimp Act, it was a hard-fought battle to get there. It's been so long ago, I think people sort of forget what it took to even get the Chimp Act signed. I mean, this is an issue. I mean, talk about what we're talking about now, that hardly anybody's following this. Talk about before the Chimp Act, nobody knew anything. Really, people didn't know what was going on at these facilities. They didn't know the level of torture. They didn't know that there was no reporting system. There was nothing. And so for folks to get to a certain point, and I say folks, I say members of Congress, senators, and congressional members, we had some heroic efforts back then. I mean, they were absolutely in committee and then on the floor. I mean, people were not having it. They were like, this is it, guys. These chimps need protection, and this is how we're going to do it. And it was almost like politics are. It's like a constellation of stars have to line up, like millions of them to get anything passed. And it did. And you would have thought in the clear language of the Chimp Act. And by the way, I should say, when Congress contemplated the Chimp Act, most of the time was spent contemplating older, less healthy chimps. That was the whole idea behind the conversation, was about Chimp Act and how we move these chimps. Now, Raina Smith, the CEO of Chimp Haven, was just on Here and Now this week, and she made an interesting point. Over the life of Chimp Haven, They've transferred hundreds of chimpanzees from federal labs without issue, without any of them passing away. And this whole idea that they're too frail to move or now too moribund to move and might go under cardiac arrest or anything else, we know how to do this. This is a very, folks know how to move these chimpanzees. This is not some old boy in a 1-ton pickup. You know what I mean?
The chimps are not on life support and they're not on machines keeping them alive. Right.
Why is it they're up in trees almost like a month after they get to Chimp Haven if they were moribund?
Right.
Why? I mean,
right.
It's so not reflective of reality about what these chimps are. And it's very unfortunate and it's illegal. I mean, they're not following the law.
Yeah, no.
And this is why, the court case that was just wrapped up, if I could touch on this for a second, the court case that was just wrapped up, we were co-plaintiffs with HSUS and a couple of individuals that was filed in December 2022. And Judge Grigsby issued her order in January of this year that said very simply this: you, meaning NIH, you are not following the law by any stretch. You're not following the law. I cannot compel you to follow the law as a federal judge. I can't make you do this because there is a separation there. We don't want federal judges, compelling agencies to do things. That would be a mess. But at the same time, the judge's language was quite strong.
Sure.
And if you read between the lines, and not even between the lines, in her wording was like, Judge Grigsby said, you people need to figure this out because this is the law. You don't have a choice here. You can't play games like this. This is why the Chimp Act and Chimp Haven were created. But here we are in June of 2024.
And it's still going on. And it's so infuriating and perplexing. But Gene, what can people do? Like, how can people help?
Thank you for that. It really is time for folks to have their voices heard. Wherever you're at, your representative, either on the Senate or House side, that counts. I don't care if you're not living in either Louisiana or New Mexico. You could be Florida, Vermont, Idaho. It does not matter. These folks have a say, all these federal folks. I would say folks living in Louisiana, if you're listening to this, if you can get some activity with your representative for Louisiana 4, which is Mike Johnson, who was Speaker of the House. Interestingly, a lot of folks don't know this, but Speaker Johnson represents the district where Chimp Haven is located. So if folks want to write to Speaker Johnson and let him know their feelings, that would help too. And on the Senate side, certainly, wherever you are, your senators will really like to hear about this because that's where it starts. Elected people are really key to this, but the big one is Dr. Bertagnolli. And there is a way to reach her on the nih.gov website. There's a contact form there. And in fact, if you want to either go to HSUS, they have a contact form, apnm.org. We have a contact form on our chimpanzee page. There's a lot of places out there now that you can find out ways to get your voice heard about this. And I would encourage any American, wherever you may be, in the name of these chimpanzees, not just at the Alamogordo Primate Facility, but all the chimpanzees at federal facilities right now, they need to go to sanctuary. Enough is enough. 2000 was a long time ago. And these folks have gotten away with this for a long time with this contract with Charles River Labs. It's time for a change, as President Clinton used to say. We're going to reference him.
And I think one other thing people could do as well is write letters to your editor and get this in newspapers everywhere.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate you mentioning that, Elizabeth, because that is big. That is happening out here in New Mexico now. I can tell you the editorial page director for the Albuquerque Journal, I wrote an op-ed about this for them about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. And the letters they are getting now, it's like this whole new side of readership they hadn't realized was even there. It's just a very interesting thing.
I love it.
But yes, I would encourage that. Please do write to your local papers, blogs, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
If folks want to reach me at APNM, there's a way to do that, apnm.org. There's contact information from me. I can get information out to you if you want to have some information to get in the fight. But the chimps need you. The chimpanzees need you. Wherever you're listening or watching this, these chimpanzees need help from us right now. And it's a desperate situation.
Gene,
I hate to put it that way, but it is.
Thank you so much for not only all that you do for these chimps, but for coming and talking about them today. We need to help these chimps. And I do think, it's happened, change does happen.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. You have to be positive about it. And being positive and feeling like you can make change as an individual, this is one of the issues where you can make change as an individual. People only get away with things because they don't hear from the public in our country. It's really simple. It's just not, again, these are not bad people. They're not evil people. They're not despicable people by any stretch. These are brilliant people at NIH. What they are is stuck with a legacy issue that they have no idea how to move forward, and we as a public need to move them forward. And it's just really that simple.
So let's do it. Gene, thank you so much. To learn more about Gene, to learn more about these chimpanzees, and for the links for how to help them, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. If you'd like to support the podcast, we greatly appreciate it. Go to our website, speciesunite.com, and click donate. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knutson, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polke, Sam Kosel, and Anna Collner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.